I want to make use of this opportunity to thank also Professor Prof Soudien, who is doing this evening's lecture, to thank him for having the time to present the lecture. I know he's got a dedicated schedule, and that's why we actually want to try and stop the session at 6:30 on the dot. Thanks a lot, Professor Soudien, for having me. Ladies and gentlemen, after those few introductory comments, I just want to place this lecture in perspective. Those of you who have attended our previous lectures will have heard the same spiel, but I want to nonetheless reiterate and repeat what I said previously for the sake of those people who are joining us for the first time today. By the way, ladies and gentlemen, I do hope that you will come to the next lecture as well as the last lecture. We've really been, for want of a better term, it's been a treat to be part of this process of unraveling what we understand by the notion of curriculum transformation in this day and age, and at the university such as the University of Victoria. So we've had multiple perspectives on what curriculum transformation means to different people, coming from different contexts. Some of the lectures that we've already had, and each of them have made an impact. They have different focus, but they have made a profound impact on the audience and the thinking of some of us who are working on issues of curriculum transformation. The first lecture was presented by Professor Kumar Leke. In fact, I'm not sure, it was either him or Professor Vasu Reddy who had done the first two, or both of them had done the first two lectures. Then we had another stimulating lecture presented by Captain Professor Odora. We also had a fairly interesting lecture, very thought-provoking, presented by Lagnan Dei. And then the last lecture that I had was presented by Dr. Salim Badr. For those of you who have not been able to attend those lectures, they are apparently on the university website, and so you can have a look at those lectures at your leisure. The next two lectures, ladies and gentlemen, will be presented by Professor Dodd Stevens, the Deputy Dean in Humanities from the University of Witwatersrand, and Professor Reddy. I hope I'm not premature in my announcement now, but I know that it has been confirmed. The last lecture will be presented by Homi Baba, the director of the Mahindra Humanities Center at Harvard University. And I do suspect that we will have a fuller crowd of people come from other universities as well, because that's also part of our intention. We did not advertise this lecture to other universities, but for that last one we want to involve more people in this discussion on curriculum transformation, because it's an issue that is of importance to UP, not only to UP, it should be of importance to the entire sector. And I think it's time also to start talking beyond university boundaries. This is a common project that all of us should engage in, to utilize education and transformation of our curricula for the betterment of our society, the betterment of South African society, but also for the betterment of the global society, because that is what really is at the crux of this lecture. Ladies and gentlemen, as you know, the University of Victoria has started what appeared to be an ambitious project at the end of 2015, namely to relook, to have another look, to critically look at its curricula, to look at the taken for granted in the higher education sector, to dissect it, and to look at where we need to change things. We've been fortunate in the sense that we've been able to involve all faculties and in this process, and that's indicative of, in fact, for the audience, for those in the audience who are not from UB, it's indicative by the fact that there have been sitting in this audience, and the deans have in fact been quite instrumental in ensuring that everyone is engaged in this process and remains engaged in this process. We have developed a framework for curriculum transformation, which I think is quite a progressive, quite a forward-thinking framework, and that has been accepted at our last Senate meeting. So every faculty now will look at the framework and have another look at the curricula, utilize the framework to develop a plan to restructure the curricula in a way that is more suited to our context, the South African context, the African context, and also to the global context. I do therefore see the next few months as being a period of great excitement, of renewal, of doing things in a way that we think they should be done. So yes, by next year this time I hope we'll be able to have a report back on the exciting things that have happened in faculties. And our faculties think we can in fact influence or change our curriculum to fundamentally start assisting in the transformation of our society. Ladies and gentlemen, those are the only two comments. I promised Professor Ogude that I'll at least say one or two things before I introduce him. So those are the comments from my side of the stage. And now I will introduce the chairperson of the session. And this has been the tradition of this session that we have a designated chairperson, introduces the chairperson, who in turn introduces the keynote speaker. Professor Ogude will take over the running of this session after I introduced him. Professor James Ogude, I'm very pleased to say, is a member of the University of Victoria community. He is a research fellow and the director of the Center for the Advancement of Scholarship at the University of Victoria. He previously served as a professor of African literature and cultures in the School of Literature and Language Studies at the University of the Witwatersrand. He also served as the head of the African literature of the Department of African Literature and was assistant dean research in the Faculty of Humanities at the University of the Witwatersrand. Professor Ogude is the author of Nguge's novels and African history, that's the title of the book, Narrating the Nation. He has also edited 5 books and 1 anthology of African stories. His most recent book is titled Chinua Achebe's Legacy Illuminations from Africa. Additionally, he has published numerous articles in peer-reviewed journals in the area of African literature and popular culture in Africa. His research interests include the African novel and the post-colonial experience in Africa. More recently, the research focus has shifted to popular cultures and literature in Africa, with a special focus on African cities and the arts in the making of identities. Prof Ogude is currently the principal investigator of the University of Victoria Research Project on African philosophy or the philosophy of Ubuntu. Together with Professor Eileen Julian of Indiana University, he is also the co-director of the project titled Art of Survival, Recasting Lives in African Cities. Prof Ogude, I received this biosketch, and I think there's one important omission from the biosketch, and that is that Prof Ogude has played a leading role in the construction of our framework for curricular transformation at the University of Victoria. So I do not think that there's a more fitting person to chair the session, particularly also given the touch of Professor Ogude's scholarship. Prof Ogude, if you would take over the session from this point onwards.
Thank you, Prof. Duncan, and I also want to again welcome all of you who have come to join us in this particular series of lectures that we've been having over, I think since last year. And for me, I think they're fairly important debates. Norman mentioned to you that in my biography, that I have a book on Buddhism, so I'm an Buddhist scholar. And sometimes I feel like I've always lived with these debates since my undergraduate days. Most of you will know that one of Buddhist living texts is Decolonizing the Mind. It was been so popular, so moving that, and I have to tell you this anecdote. At one time, we were interviewing a candidate when I was at the University of Leeds, and this candidate wanted to do publishing. And then we asked him, so can you tell us what you've read? Are there any novels that you've read? And then he said, yes, I have read a novel called Decolonizing the Mind. Obviously, it was not a novel. It is a collection of essays that he decided that he had read the novel. So I've been very much part and parcel of this debate on decolonizing the mind, and yet every time I look back and reflect on the idea of decolonizing the curriculum and all the debate that has been going on, I feel that I know very little. Again, I want to frame my introduction of Prof by giving you another very minor anecdote. Sometime last year, those of you will know Judge Davis, the program called Judge for Yourself. I don't know how many of you follow that program. I watched keenly a number of stakeholders, including a number of student activists. And in the middle of the debate, one of the student activists was saying that they're tired of whiteness. And then Dennis finally asked her, okay, can you explain to our listeners what whiteness means? And the student was tongue-tied. Eventually the student said, I have a right to hate whites. So Dennis said, oh, is that what whiteness means? So you have a right to hate it. I frame this talk with that anecdote precisely to say how some of these concepts that have been flying around that we keep using need a lot of clarity. That we constantly need to interrogate all the terms and metaphors that we are trying to use to understand what sometimes appear to be very easy, but which in my view are sometimes very complex issues. And I think there's no better person to address some of these issues that have been confronting us about curriculum change. As I told you, I've heard the debate over the years as an undergraduate student at the University of Nairobi, as a postgraduate student, and I've continued, to read a lot in that area. And yet, I'm still seeking clarity in a range of areas, and I'm hoping that Professor Prof Soudien is going to bring some clarity. Even if we disagree, there is need for us to have the debate. Even if we don't see eye to eye, I think our role as intellectuals is to engage and disaggregate issues and terms that we may not find explanations for. With that, I want to introduce Professor Soudien. Professor Prof Soudien is the Chief Executive Officer of the Human Sciences Research Council and formerly a Deputy Vice Chancellor at the University of Cape Town, where he remains an Emeritus Professor in Education and African Studies. His publications in the areas of social difference, culture, education policy, comparative education, educational change, public history, popular culture include 3 books, 4 edited collections, and over 190 articles, reviews, reports, and book chapters, including a 2017 publication entitled Nelson Mandela, Comparative Perspectives of His Significance for Education. He's also the co-editor of 3 books on District 6, Cape Town, a jointly edited book on comparative education, and the author of The Making of a Youth Identity in Contemporary South Africa, Race, Culture, and Schooling. Again, he's also the author of Realizing a Dream, The Dream, and Learning the Logic of Race in South African Schools, and the co-author of Inclusion and Exclusion in South Africa and Indian Schools. He was educated at the University of Cape Town and UNISA, South Africa, but he also holds a PhD from the State University of New York at Buffalo. He is involved in a number of local, national, and international social and cultural organizations, and is also the chairperson of the Independent Examinations Board, the former chairperson of the District 6 Museum Foundation, and a former president of the World Council of Comparative Education Societies, and have been the chair of the Ministerial Committee on Transformation in Higher Education, and is currently the chair of the Ministerial Committee to evaluate textbooks for discrimination. He is a fellow of a number of local and international academies and serves on the boards of a number of cultural, heritage, education, and civil structures. As you can see from the resume, this is the right person to talk to us about debates in the decolonization movement and the area of curriculum review. Prof.
Thank you very much, Professor Goudet. And I'd like to thank Professor Duncan for initiating this invitation for me to come to speak here this evening. And a big thank you to all of you for being here. Really appreciate it. And I hope that we are able to have a really productive discussion afterwards. So what am I going to do here tonight? Essentially, I'm going to try and get through 40 slides. And I will tarry and delay over some of them. Some of them I will move over quite quickly. Essentially, what I'm going to be doing is to talk a little bit about the post-apartheid university. I'm going to say a little bit about the curriculum. I won't do very much there. And then I want to get into this whole debate here. And this is the heart of the discussion around what decolonization is being presented as in the country at the moment. So I acknowledge James sitting over there and to say to you that there's, of course, a much bigger discussion about decolonization, which is happening in many other parts of the world, including in Latin America. But I'm going to be looking at what's going on here. And then I'm going to end a little bit, very briefly, around talking about what the implications might be for thinking about us here in spaces such as these. So let me make this first point. So I'm going to flash through about 6 or 7 slides here quickly. And these slides are essentially an attempt to explain a concept which people have been using quite a lot in the last while, but which I think hasn't been explained. And it's fundamentally the concept of massification. What I'm going to do is to try and show what the implications of this massification have been. The argument that I'm going to be making depends on this first explication, if you like. So I use here, and I don't know how many of you have had the opportunity to read the work of a really important higher education scholar. His name is Martin Trauw. Trauw, T-R-O-W, at the top there. Okay? And Martin Trauw wrote a piece about the transitions through which higher education systems go. And he first put this out in the 1970s and the 1980s, and he revised it about 10 years ago. And he put together a table here which talks about the differences between what he calls elite systems, mass systems, and universal systems. Now, I'm going to be in the space here between this elite and the mass here. I'm not interested in there. We're a long way from that. But the point that I'm going to be basically making to you is that we've moved over from being a system like this to being a system like that. And what Trauw does is to give us some sense of what the features are of elite systems and what the features are of mass systems. And this is of, I think, deep significance for us. So we've been talking and using this term about massification, but not coming to pay attention to what's going on inside of the system. And I just want to take you very quickly through these key features that he does, and they on the left here, and they won't always be on the left. In later slides, they'll be on the top. These features of what the differences are between elite systems and mass systems. The point that he makes is that in terms of access, in elite systems, people think it's a right of birth. You know, I'm born the son of so-and-so, I will go to Pretoria. And a specification also the residence that he or she should be put into. In mass systems, it's basically around qualifications. Qualifications matter. Birth doesn't matter. The function of an elite system is to prepare people for dominance, to prepare people's minds for ruling. In mass systems, you've got a lot more emphasis on the making of skills. It's preparing people to make this transition into adulthood and how they manage this transition into adulthood. Elite systems are highly structured in terms of academic and professional conceptions of knowledge. So there's a big thing in elite systems about how knowledge systems work. Those of you who are professors will know how jealously you're going to guard your turf in relation to, particularly if you're working in an area that is relatively cognate, and so a biochemist and a chemist are always in really interesting conversations about precedence. It gets interesting in terms of institutional characteristics. Elite systems are often very homogeneous. They operate around tight residential kinds of sensibilities, and you can think of the way in which places like Oxford and Cambridge have provided for us the examples of how institutions should be, and our inclination everywhere in the world to be like Oxford and Cambridge. Mass systems have diverse standards. They kind of present themselves as cities. You folks are almost like a city. They're complicated places. Fuzzy boundaries. The elites, in terms of decision making, are often run by the Athenaeum. That's the kind of Greek idea of this priesthood sitting at the top of an institution, making these wise decisions for how the institution should work. Mass systems are open to political contestation. They are, vibrant places in which, and you have that now, in which political parties have influence. Your student movement and the SRC operates like that. In terms of academic standards, everybody in an elite system agrees on what the standard is. In mass systems, a lot of debate. I want to move on just quickly to these last things, the internal governance, and this is related to an earlier point. Elite systems are led by senior professors, and in the governance structures of mass systems are much more open. So here's Trow now making this definition. And he says the problems can be understood better as different manifestations of a related cluster of problems. And here's the key point. They arise out of the transition from one phase to another in a broad pattern of development of our education. And I want to say to you, we're in a transition. We're in a space in which we're moving over from that elite structure out of which our history comes to becoming a mass system. And I'd like to show this to you. Now, many of you might be familiar with these statistics, but here's this astonishing statistic. In 1993, between 1993 and 2013, African enrollments in higher education increased by 261%. I mean, it's an absolutely astonishing figure to come to terms with. And I don't put this in the slide, but it's related to a more significant and less discussed sociological shift that has happened in our broader society. And that sociological shift is in some ways the most important thing that has arisen since 1994 that we as sociologists, I'm a sociologist, I'll say to you, have not paid attention to. So I'm very critical of sociology in the way in which sociology has missed, if you like, the complexity of what has gone on. And what is that complexity? In 1993, the African middle class in South Africa was 350,000 strong, out of a population of 45 million people, 350 strong. By the time we get to 2014, that number is, and we're in a debate there, a few of us in sociology, that number is either 4 million or 14 million. It's one of the most important sociological shifts that has happened in the last while. And it's manifested itself in the universities. The universities have picked up and demonstrate that particular reality. So this transition that we are going through is deeply conditioned by these much more fundamental things that have happened in the nature of our society. And there's a lot to talk about in that particular, around that particular subject. There's a lot. And I'll say to you, because you can get into all sorts of polemical, but also conceptual puzzles around making sense of what that transition is all about. But the most important thing to say to you is that this middle class is a new middle class, and it's a very different thing to the old middle class, right? It's very different in the way in which it's constituted, in the way it's composed, and the way in which its aspirations are structured in relation to what the old middle class is. And it's a fragile middle class at the same time. So it doesn't have, and this is the difference between the black middle class and the white middle class. The black middle class doesn't have the wealth of the white middle class, okay? The black middle class might now be, in terms of income, earning more than the white middle class, but its wealth base is fundamentally different. And that has consequences. You know, it has consequences for all sorts of things, not least of all the kinds of social capitals that percolate in a society and so on. So they're complicated. It's a complicated moment. And the complexity of just the way in which this middle class has evolved is, as I say, something that we as sociologists have underplayed. So these numbers are numbers that project and come to account for that 261%. While this has happened, the key thing is that white members of staff still remain, if you like, the dominant demographic factor inside of institutions. These numbers have shifted. There's no doubt about it. But they haven't shifted to the same degree as the student numbers have shifted. And so there's a fundamental tension which is structured into the system, and you can talk about and think about what the complexities around all of that might be. And so the point that I simply want to leave with you, colleagues, and this is the first part of this talk here, is that we've tipped over. We have now tipped over into a mass education system. Sorry, and I didn't say it to you, but you would have seen it in the slide there earlier. Charles says when a system reaches 16% participation, it becomes classified as a mass education system. When it's under 16%, it still is regarded as an elite system. We're now in the 16.9%. You know, that's where we are. But I don't want to lose this point here. So this was very controversial. It caused a lot of discussion. It was first raised by the Statistician General, and he was making a comment about what's happening inside of universities. The point is, and it's a really critical point, is that of the students the first-year students who are classified African who enter university, 47.9% of them are not finishing that first year. Okay, so think about this transition. Think about those kinds of statistics and how they are of consequence. And so this is just to conclude that first segment. And I want to move on to talking about what the implications of this are. Now, I've been talking around the country about the implications of this tipping over for the last year. And I've had the opportunity to talk to colleagues in several places and try to make the point that the implications, and you can use Trow's categories there, The implications for South the South African university are absolutely fundamental. And they begin with that first question that I put there. I think we're confronted with this big question now of what is it that we want the South African university to be. Okay? So as we're moving into this transition, what do we want this university to be? And there's no unanimity. There's no agreement. People are coming at this particular question from all kinds of angles and positions and making suggestions about what should happen. And you can imagine it's highly contested territory. Sub-features of that particular question relate to now what should be taught inside of the university. You know, what should be taught? Who should be doing the teaching? What should be researched? And what is the responsibility of the university to its hinterland, to the context in which it finds itself? Now, colleagues, I'm not going to talk about these other things on this occasion. I'm just simply going to talk about this year, and that's essentially the curriculum question. So, when I've done other versions of this talk here, I've spent a little while. I speak to educationists. I spend a lot more time around this particular question about what the curriculum is. I do a quick digest here of some of the most critical thinkers in the curriculum field, and I start off with Paulo Freire. With Paulo Freire, who makes the argument that in most places the curriculum is disconnected from the context in which it might find itself. I use that particular phrase here because I want to say this to everybody. This discussion that we're having here about the curriculum here is happening everywhere else in the world. Okay? So the decolonization discussion is not a unique discussion. It's a discussion which takes a particular form here. It has a particular vocabulary, a particular kind of emotional tenor, but it's a discussion which is happening everywhere. It is alive in places like Australia. It's alive in the Ivy League universities. It's alive in the UK right now. And it's about this comment here that Paulo Freire makes about disconnected from life, emptied from reality. It lacks, he says, in concrete activity. And the big thing in this curriculum discussion around the world is about critical consciousness. So Paulo Freire says it can be different. You know, it can be fundamentally different. You can have a curriculum which helps human beings to relate, as he says, to their world in a critical way. They apprehend the objective data of their reality through critical reflection, not by reflex, as do animals. And in the act of critical perception, men discover their own temporality. He has influenced a whole lot of people. He's influenced a man called Grundy, who wrote in the 1980s already, who was making the argument here that a curriculum of praxis goes beyond the learning experience within the experience of goes beyond situating the learning experience within the experience of the learner. And here's the kicker for me. It is a process which takes the experiences of both the learner and the teacher, and through dialogue and negotiation, recognizes them both as problematic. Both teachers and learners are problematic. Okay? Say to the students, yes, these teachers of yours are problematic, but actually so are you. You know, and you need to be recognizing and engaging with this fundamental reality. And it's essentially that all of us bring, and this is the thesis behind all of this, all of us bring to that learning moment our complicated histories. Every time we are in that engagement with each other, our complicated histories are at work in the synthetic kind of form in which what comes out is an amalgam of all of these histories which form us. Some of us are able to, in that moment, privilege our academic identities. Some of us are able to privilege incorrectly, our social identities, and you get absolute confusion about what is happening in the sociology of that moment. So the sociology of that moment is a wonderful encounter which you can't read symptomatically. You know, you can't read it just like so. You know, you've got to make it an object of engagement. And this is what this Grundy stuff is all about. And saying, you know, when I come to teach you mathematics, a lot of it will be about mathematics, but a lot of it will also be about me. You know, and come to engage and work with that kind of complexity. So this brings me then to the heart of what this discussion is all about. So we come to now this incredible moment which we began at the beginning of 2015, where decolonization as an idea came to be preeminent in the ways in which a whole lot of struggles came together in universities around the country. So it starts, of course, at the University of Cape Town, and there's a whole narrative that you can follow around all of that. I happened to be right there then, at the very core of it, and was you know, very deeply involved in trying to think through how to proceed out of it. And this is the equivalent of your Senate chamber at UCT. That's the Senate chamber, the Mafeji chamber at UCT, which became the space which students occupied for 3 weeks and turned into a decolonized space. The point that I'm wanting to make to you is that I think that after 2015, this not new, and let me emphasize this, understanding of what the debates and what the issues in the curriculum are were brought to the fore in South Africa in a way in which they hadn't been before. They had been present there before, but they were not evident to the intensity which happened in 2015. I'll just say to you by the way of anecdote. So I did my first degree in the 1970s, and I had people teaching me this stuff in the 1970s, okay, at UCT. So there was interesting stuff being engaged in the universities earlier already. Now, I say that simply to say to you that universities are complicated spaces. They go up and down. You have fashions and trends. You have people coming in who are able to tell you things. Departments change, and you have new heads come, and you might go in a completely different direction. So universities don't go like that or like that. They go like this. And those histories are always dependent on the ecologies of knowledges that are circulating in those particular times. But we're now in a space where that ecology of knowledge is defined fundamentally by the preeminence of decolonization as an issue which we are now having to take a whole lot more seriously. It's in our faces. It's in our faces in a way in which it hasn't been before. What does it mean? I think there's widespread agreement, and most people would say this, that what decolonization is, and it's the way in which the debate is happening everywhere else in the world, it's about how the debate has come to be centered on the preeminence of Europe, okay? And people are saying this everywhere where there is critical thinking going on, about the idea that the Enlightenment is the beginning of, if you like, global progress and global civilization. And the critique that the idea of Europe in the way in which that idea is presented is problematic. To say, first of all, that the idea of Europe has been rendered in a way as if Europe doesn't have a history, that there haven't been antecedents and experiences before Europe which make Europe. And that the whole European experience actually depends on everybody else in the world, including Africa. So Europe isn't born de novo. isn't born as if it didn't have parents. We are its parents. And those parents come from everywhere. And that's the first point to make. The second point to make is that enlightenment as an idea has been corralled around the experience of the 1800s, 1800s. And that particular, and this is, you'll see this when people talk about the history of ideas, when people talk about the history of science. And people will often say to you that it's not the discoveries that are the most important thing that have come out of Europe, it's the methodology of knowledge creation. It's the whole idea of proof and warrant, or warrant and proof. It's the way in which this methodology of coming to an understanding of what a fact is which is what this great contribution is which comes out of Europe. It's partly true, and you have to concede that, okay? Partly true. But it's not as if that hadn't been there before and distributed elsewhere around the world. But the related point to make to that is to say that actually that way of seeing cannot be the only way of coming to explain cause and event. So this positivist way of coming to understand how to explain phenomena is not sufficient simply by using this cosmological explanation which comes out of this experience of the 1800s. So when people talk about decentering, they are essentially making the appeal to say, open yourself to the possibility that there may be other ways in which we can explain social reality, natural phenomena around us. Just open yourself to that possibility. Not saying take that other possibility and replace it with the Europe, but just open yourself to the possibility that there are alternative explanations of how things might work and what reality might be all about. And that's the fundamental critique of decoloniality. Okay? You read the major decolonial authors, and that's what they are saying. Make space for other ways of coming to understand what is going on. So there's agreement about that. And that agreement, the impact of that and the significance for all of this for all of us is to say that just in mathematics, from mathematics right through to accounting, actually admit the possibility that you can account in different kinds of ways, right? And that the logics of each of these disciplines would have, if you like, supplementary, might have different analogues, different other logics in ways in which you come to explain things. So in saying that, I'm saying to you that decoloniality is not just a conversation of the humanities. Okay? It applies in bucket loads to all the different ways in which we come to think about approaching problems, explaining things, and how we come to provide answers for what is going on around us. But I want to, and let me just leave the slide here, and it'll quickly tell you how some of our colleagues around the country who are talking about this are explaining this. So they're using this decolonial approach to make comments about conception, construction, and transmission. Okay? The making of knowledge, the reproduction of knowledge, and the dissemination of knowledge. And it's about the formal curriculum, the informal curriculum, and the hidden curriculum. And this is, by the way, Ahmed Esop made these comments in response to an inaugural lecture that was given at University of Johannesburg last year by Brenda Leibowitz. His major point was that we need to be changing the cultures on the campus. But I now want to trouble all of this a little bit. So I've said to you what we have agreement about, and now I want to talk about what actually is the substantial issue which we now need to be paying attention to. And my essential point is to say to you that the decolonization debate has many positions. There are many postures, many orientations from which people are coming towards making this particular debate. In the South African context right now, there are two dominant positions. And these positions essentially arise out of, I think, a question, and this was made by a colleague, Niati, who was saying, you're complaining about decentering, you're complaining about being left out, and you're complaining about exclusion, but who exactly are you talking about, right? When you say inclusion, recognition, and affirmation, what exactly do you mean? And this is what I think James was referring to. You know, that we have an easy rhetoric, an easy kind of recourse to, and I'll say it, cliches in the way in which this discussion is being managed, and it's not appropriate. You know, we have to be far clearer in the specificities of what it is that we are talking about when we talk about inclusion, recognition, and affirmation. So what are these two positions? So I'll put this out here, and I'll say to you, I've come to this myself, and I'm not quite happy with these categories, or rather with these labels of these categories. So I'm saying to you that I'm coming to this, and I'm describing that the two positions that we have in the country at the moment are essentially the black intersectionalist one and the post-human one, and I'll use those. But I'd be happy to hear if you have better ways of coming at this. You know, I'd be happy to hear any suggestions that you might want to make. The first one is, of course, the intersectionalist view comes out of the Rhodes Must Fall and the Fees Must Fall movement. The post-human view is promoted essentially at the moment in the country by two big scholars, two major Africanist scholars, Kwesi Pra and Achille Mbembe. And they constitute these two scholars, and it's almost a generational kind of difference also, which you see. James, you would know these things very well. But I do want to say that neither of these two schools, the black intersectionalists, the Rhodes Must Fall and the Fees Must Fall community, is not a united community. It's not a single community. It's got lots of also very different positions. But so also the post-human view, you'll see the difference between the way Kwesi Pra comes at it and the way in which Achille Mbembe comes at it. But I bracket them in the way in which I do here simply for convenience. Now let me talk about the black intersectionalist view. The black intersectionalist view, this is largely the UCT school. So there's the UCT school in this view, and there may be others, but the UCT school is deeply, if you like, motivated by this whole concept of alienation. So the centering, which Eurocentric knowledge does, is what they take as their point of departure about this alienation, because this Eurocentric thing, they say, seeks to control where we live, how we speak, what we say, and when we speak, how we think, and perhaps most importantly for us, what we think, speak, and write about. They reject it. Okay? To be a radical African intellectual is to challenge on fundamentally personal, institutional, and societal levels this form of alienation that colonial education encourages. And their big move here, the big move that they make, and it's a really important move, and it's a move about normativity. And they are saying that the whole way in which this knowledge complex comes to work in their lives and in governing every single thing about them is to norm them in particular kinds of ways, is to give them the standards for every single thing that they do. And so I sometimes do this presentation, and you will see that in the ways in which the students have often come to this, they've put tape around their mouths and they've said, I can't breathe. Now, of course, that's an American thing. Comes out of a situation where a young man was being harassed by police in the United States, and he was crying there saying, I cannot breathe, and this is how this thing has multiplied and morphed itself into a statement elsewhere about literally not being able to breathe. And when this thing started at UCT, I mean, it was students at every single event presented themselves like this. And so here you have Leanne Naidu, who gave a big lecture, one of the first lectures in the course of last year, and she made the point that their approach there was to disrupt the norms of the system. You're not in charge of us. And it's a pretty fundamental statement. And Roads Must Fall gives expression to all of this. It says our freedom cannot be given to us. We must take it. We want to be clear that our only regret is that we did not take the statue down ourselves. Very interesting things about how that statue came down. So I was there, and it's spawned a whole separate narrative by itself. Don't want to change the mood terribly much, but Rhodes began at UCT that evening and ended up in the backyard of an Athlone garage by the end of the evening. And so if that was decolonization, it was quite a dramatic move. But the point is that students had decided that this whole system here, which they found themselves in, required them no longer to compromise. Management is our enemy. Our objective here is to create new spaces on UCT's campuses for black bodies where they could breathe. Now, a major issue here, and one which I'm going to return to towards closing this presentation, is to talk about black intersectionalism and what black intersectionalism conceptually means. Black intersectionalism is an idea which is articulated a whole lot more. So you're not going to find it amongst our students. Our students are not going to talk about it. But the idea essentially comes from black feminism. And it's in the black feminist movement where deep philosophic developments are being explored around the way in which the female black body has been essentialized and come to be treated. And it's intersectional in the way in which this idea is expressed, because it's about the body, but it's also about gender, and it's about patriarchy, and it's about class, and it's about the multiple ways in which women have been positioned at the very bottom of, if you like, the ladder of recognition and dignity. That women sit at the bottom of what this ladder is all about. And the black intersectionalists have come to make the political edge of the way in which they speak the abjection of this black body. Now, there's a whole lot of work which needs to be done here, and I want to say to those of you who are interested, either as psychologists or sociologists, that there is great opportunity here for doing work which engages with the methodological complexities of coming to pose questions about black bodies, and the methodological things about, do white people have a right to study things like that, and that's a methodological puzzle all by itself, to actually coming to a better sense of what people are talking about in this context, as opposed to the American context. Okay, in this context, when people are using language like this. So there's a lot of material that I think that we're beginning to get at here. In journalism, every single week you will find people talking in this kind of language. But you're not going to find a lot of explanation. You're not going to find a lot of a lot of clarification. And it's not unproblematic, because you are entering a discursive space here which has frameworks around this discursive space which call for discussion. And not least of all, as I say, how one starts to talk about those kinds of things. But I move on quickly to talk about the post-humanist position. So here's Achille Mbembe and Kwesi Pra. And just very telegraphed, in a very telegraphed kind of way to say to you, they're making an argument here that this Enlightenment project has reached the end of its both limits, if you like, and its shelf life. That the ways in which we come to understand who we are as human beings is requiring now a fundamental reorientation to understand what humanness is all about. They start off, though, with an anxiety about the way in which the intersectionalists, the black intersectionalists, have in some ways reinstituted the idea of race. So the idea of race here is what is the basic separation between the intersectionalists and the post-humanists. The intersectionalists, particularly in the way in which this idea of the body has been recovered, is fundamentally pivoted on an understanding of race, and the post-humanists are saying that it's actually more than about race. They are anxious about what they call the nativization of race and tribe. Kwesi Pra's approach to it is different to that of Achille Mbembe. Kwesi Pra's whole thing is about language. He makes the argument that language and culture are the most important things which you need to understand, which have been displaced through Eurocentric dominance. That the entire experience of African culture over thousands and thousands of years has been effaced. That experience has completely been erased. And so he has made his project, and he works to this day, and it's one of the most critical contributions that is being made right now. It's this recovery of what these languages are all about. He is one of the most pivotal, if you like, rescuers of what this knowledge base out of which we come is all about. So the point he makes, if development is to take place, it has to do so not on the basis of my skin color, but of culture. The centering of African culture at the heart of the development endeavor is crucial. Mbembe is slightly different. Mbembe begins very much where the black intersectionalists start, and he is talking about how, and his focus is really on the violence of appropriation, European appropriation, and the displacement of African ideas of creation and self-creation. But where he wants to go is, as he says, the creation of new forms of life. The point he says is that the ideas of futurity don't belong to the Europeans. Europeans, as he says, don't have the market on thinking about where the world is going to be going. It's a much more complicated thing. And the way in which he comes to that is to talk about the presumptive universalism of Eurocentric ideas, and to talk, and introduces this word here called pluriversal. Multiple knowledges is what I began speaking about where I started. And you may begin to intuit where I myself am in relation to all of this. So he's in talking about pluriversal, And he gets into trouble because of this. He got into a huge big fight at UCT and a few places around, making the point that he was not actually against the European archive. Okay? I'm not really against it, he says. I'm angry about the way in which it's used. So he's very insistent that you need to know the stuff. That you need to have a familiarity. You need to know Heidegger. Right? You need to know what the third law or the second law of thermodynamics is all about. You need to know these things. You would be foolish if you refuse to get your head around that kind of thing. And so, in some ways, he says he's against a simplistic de-Westernizing of knowledge. And of course, you heard, so the way in which particularly the newspapers have done this, many of you would have seen that video that was taken of the student at UCT. Sorry, I keep mentioning UCT, and I don't want to. They're not better than you. Where the student comes and talks about abandoning and throwing away, these odd European forms of science and saying we must start all over again. And he's very adamant that that's not the right way to go. But he's interested, and this is, I think, the major philosophic point. He's saying that what you need to be doing is to develop perspectives which allow you to see yourselves in your full complexity. I mean, that's what this decolonial project ultimately must be all about, which will allow you to see yourself in your complexity. Not allow you to see yourself as that narrative says who you are. Either blackness or whiteness. But to see yourself in your full complexity, and this is where he becomes a little Latourian. Some of you know Bruno Latour? Okay, so now Bruno Latour does this thing about sentience, about feeling, and makes the argument that it's not only human beings who have this capacity to feel. Other creatures, he goes a little further, it says even mountains have this capacity to feel, to relate. So the Latourian thing is complicated. But what Latour does is to say that human beings have come to create the world as if they're the only creatures that matter. And Achille Mbembe is in that space. He's talking about a deep democracy and saying that where we need to be going in this decolonial space is to come to a deep sense of the rights. It doesn't use the word citizenship rights, but the rights of all forms of beings. Our world is populated, he says, by a variety of non-human actors. They are unleashed in the world as autonomous actors in their own right. And so what is at stake, he says, and it's really interesting. He gave this talk, and he may have given it even here. He gave this talk around the country, and here he was beginning to talk about decolonization and ending in this absolutely extraordinary line. It's about humankind ruling in common for a common which includes the non-humans. So what I'm trying to say to you here, colleagues, that this is, in this decolonization debate, you have the black intersectionalist position, but you also have this absolutely extraordinary position which Achille Mbembe ends with, which includes the non-humans, which is the proper name, he says, for democracy. Amazing, isn't it? Absolutely amazing. So I close with this comment here that he makes here. He says, to reopen the future of our planet to all who inhabit it, we will have to learn how to share it again among the humans, but also between the humans and the non-humans. Right, so I now come to the end of the talk. And the end of the talk is essentially to kind of position myself and say what I think are the blind spots that are inherent in these different ways of coming at this particular discussion. So the post-humans are very critical of the intersectionalists because of this whole stuff around the black body. Okay? So the post-humans, the Mbembes and the Kwesi-Pras, are making the argument that the intersectionalists have essentially re-racialized the body and have taken us back to the original problem which comes out of the Enlightenment and the whole preeminence of the way in which European epistemology has constituted itself. I would largely go along with that criticism. But I'd say to them that actually there's something more here which we need to be paying attention to. There's cause for pause as we listen to the black intersectionalists. And that cause for pause is, and it gets controversial here, but I'm going to say it just as I think it needs to be said, and that's racism. What the black intersectionalists are pointing to us, however and wherever they end in the way in which their philosophic arguments might go, they're pointing us to this deep, deep, and I'll use the word here, civilizational way in which racism has come to inflict, condition, and point the world in the way in which the world has moved. And that's what this I can't breathe thing is all about. We're living, I think, civilizationally. We're living civilizationally in the shadow of these deep racisms that have now spread throughout the world. And that racism is fundamentally about white is right, and whiteness is better than any other form of aesthetic, in both, if you like, value systems and in the symbolic forms of the world in which we find ourselves. And of course we have to understand just what has happened in the ways in which both high culture and popular culture have been, in a sense, captured, to use a current term, by this white aesthetic. It is there. And of course we're now having to deal with the consequences of this in terms of hair, skin color, whitening, speech, all these forms of address and presentation are this problem that I am referring to. Very recently, Mampela Rampela has just put out a new book. And in this book, she's reflecting on what's going on. She says, when it comes to talk about this thing, black pain, she says, believe me when I tell you that it is there. And I'd like to say to us, we need to believe her. We need to believe her. And we're having to deal with it. And this is what I think the value of this intersectionalist engagement in our face is all about. They're talking to us, the students are talking to us about this pain. And it's a pain which comes on, of course it takes different forms, it comes on in different forms, but it's right here. And I'd like to say to you that I don't think that this post-human critique of Mbembe and Kwesi-Pra actively engages with that pain. So this is an issue here, colleagues, I'd say to you, for our curriculum work. I developed this particular talk in response to, and I just want to put this into context. When some colleagues who work in the HIV/AIDS field came to me and said to me, what do we in HIV/AIDS have to teach people who are debating the curriculum? And I said to them that it's this thing of pain. on the pain of dying. The pain of dying which HIV/AIDS people have had to deal with is an incredible experience which has been multiplied every day into South Africans' lives in incredible kinds of ways. It's an issue also which we are needing to get our heads around. But the lesson that it leaves us is that it's not so different in some ways to this pain which racism is leaving with us. And so all I'm saying to you in bringing this to a close is that we have work to do. And I can't tell you how to do this work. I mean, I cannot say to you as a biologist or as an accountant, you need to be doing X, Y, and Z. Are you watching the time? But I'll finish now, Norman. But I want to say that the major issue in front of us, every single one of you here, is to acknowledge that when the students are coming into your class, they're bringing the stuff into the class with them. And crucially now, we're now needing to think, and this takes us back to the post-humanists, where I think the post-humanists can be helpful, is to argue and to think about how our disciplines, what we're talking about, can manage human empowerment from disempowerment to powerfulness. We need to think about how we work with the anger, depression that is there present in the communities in which we find ourselves. And we critically, in doing that, need to be working with, and how we do this, again, I have no answers for you. How you bring traditional knowledge, how you bring indigenous knowledge into your classroom, I don't know how you do that. But you have to find ways of doing it. You have to find ways of acknowledging that when the students come and stand in front of you, you need to know that those students, and I'll say it, their parents would be going to sangomas and finding relief in that experience of going to a sangoma in one form or another. There's lived experience there that is deep and meaningful. And it's not unscientific. And we need to be finding ways of bringing that into the classroom. So all I'm saying to you, colleagues, is that there are affordances that we have with the students in which we come and stand before, and we need to know how to be engaging with them. Because ultimately, and this is the last point that I want to make here, we have to be defending, whether we're talking about elite systems or mass systems or universal systems, we have to be defending, and this is the hallmark of the university above everything else. If we are going to say anything about what this university is all about, in the end, it has to teach us how to think. And how to think critically in relation to the complexities which surround us, whatever those complexities might be. If the university comes and teaches us these cliches, teaches us formula, teaches us these answers which we take out of our pockets and offer as quick arguments and think that that's the argument, that's the end of the university. The university is gone. So we have to think about how we come back to that single precious thing which above all is going to define, irrespective of where this university is going to go, what this quality of critical capacity to think is all about. And so with that, thank you very much, colleagues.